So this lecture is one of the exchange lecture series between Tokyo Gakugei University and Bridgewater State University. Last semester, Tokyo Gakugei University invited two of our faculty members, Dr. John Marvell and Dr. Andre Kaysen, to lecture for their students. And this semester, we invited Dr. Iwata and Dr. Harada to lecture for us. So students in both countries can learn from other professors in Japan or in the United States. Tokyo Gakugei University and Bridgewater State University also have worked together for what we call the collaborative online international learning, which is joint classrooms between a class in physical education and a class by Dr. Karen Richardson and Dr. Naoki Suzuki. More recently, Dr. Heather Pacheco Guthrie in elementary education also met up with a physics teacher in elementary school last Tuesday. So this is the fourth or the fifth cooperation between the universities. So I've already introduced Dr. Kazuo Harada. So the floor is yours. The plan is for him to give a lecture first, and after that, we'll go into breakout rooms for discussion and talk about his lectures and some of the questions and issues. And after that, we'll coming back here and for concluding discussion. Dr. Harada, the floor is yours.
Hey, thank you very much, Professor Toll, for the kind introduction. I'll be talking today about how Japanese teachers spend time at work. This is different from the lectures that I usually give. I'll talk about some of the discussions that we've been having in the Global Education Research Group that I listed on the bottom. So this was research was led by Dr. David Wong of Michigan State University and Dr. Naomi Kagawa of Shimane University in Japan. And they invited me to join them in this global education research. So I was very fortunate to be able to discuss some of these issues, in particular about how Japanese teachers spend time at work. We also conducted some surveys of pre-service and in-service teachers, young teachers in Japan. So I'll show you some of that data as well. Okay, so how do I get to the next? Okay, so today's topics. First, I'll talk about Japanese teachers' long working hours. Many surveys have shown that Japanese teachers work very long hours, many more than in the United States. Oops, sorry. So, and I'll try to describe to you why they're so long. Next, I'll talk a little bit about what the Japanese government and local school boards are doing to address this question. And then I'll also show some survey results of Japanese teachers' working hours and about where they feel professional and personal satisfaction. And then finally, I'd like to present some questions for discussions. Okay, so this is from an article from about 2 years ago, and it shows that from a survey by the OECD, the 2018 Teaching and Learning International Survey, so-called TALIS survey, showed that lower secondary teachers in Japan worked 56 hours per week on average, compared to an international average of 38.3 hours. So that's almost 18 hours longer than the average. And this is per week, okay? I want you to think about how many hours US teachers in America teach? Does anybody have an idea? How many hours per week do they spend time at work? I think the question was how many hours teachers spend time at work.
Feel free to speak up and answer the question.
Yes.
So between 35 and 40 hours
35
at work.
At work, okay, so about average. Okay, so according to the data that I have, teachers in the US teach about an average 43 hours per week, okay, which is still 13 hours shorter than the hours in Japan, okay. So Japan, according to this survey, was the only country that taught more than 50 hours per week, okay. The next highest was Kazakhstan in Central Asia, and that was about 49 hours, okay. So Japan, according to this survey, is very long. Okay, so I'll show you some interesting data. So this is from the same survey. So it shows the percentage of lower secondary teachers, so junior high school teachers, working time spent teaching. So the percentage of time spent teaching. So the y-axis, the vertical axis shows the percentage of total statutory working time spent teaching, okay? And the horizontal axis shows the number of teaching hours per year, okay? So I just want you to look at the vertical axis. So the United States is here, so a little less than 50% of their time at work is spent teaching, okay? Whereas in Japan, this percentage is a little bit over 30%, okay? So Japanese teachers only spent about 1/3 of their time at work teaching. So the question is, what do they do? What do Japanese teachers do the remainder of the time? Okay, so let's see the next slide. So just to get it, just so that you have an idea of what how the Japanese teachers spend time at work, I asked two of my two graduates of Tokyo Gakuge University what their daily schedule is. Okay, so these are the first teacher is Mr. Satoshi Tanamura. He's a biology teacher in Yamagata Prefecture. He's been a teacher for about 3 years. He obtained a master's degree at Tokyo Gakuge University. He spent 2 years in Ethiopia as a volunteer teaching biology, and then he became a teacher in Yamagata Prefecture. Okay, so next I'll show you what his how he spends time at work. So he arrives at 7:45. This is 1 hour before school actually starts. Okay, he teaches 3 classes. That's not very many. That's less than 3 hours. He spends about half an hour to an hour of preparation for each class. He's a biology teacher, so he has a lot of lab work. So he probably needs to spend time preparing for lab work. He spends 7 hours in what's called a teacher's room. Okay, and I'll show you what that looks like next. Japanese teachers have various school duties. So each teacher is responsible for different tasks. I think typically each teacher would be responsible for about 2 or 3 different duties. So they would be in different committees. In the case of Satoshi, his school duty is in educational affairs. So he spends about an hour a day average for educational affairs. So if you're responsible for educational affairs, you manage the the schedule of each of the teachers. So you set up a timetable and make sure that each teacher is teaching enough hours for each subject. Okay, so that's a lot of work. It's kind of a demanding duty. Okay. School ends at 3:45, and then in Japan, most teachers would supervise club activities. Okay. And in his case, he supervises the women's volleyball club. So this is about 2 hours a day, and then 3 hours on weekends. They also practice on weekends, so they would supervise on weekends. So typically he would leave school between 7 and 9 p.m. That's pretty late. So he's been at school for 12 hours or more. And sometimes he needs to work home. If he leaves early, if he leaves at 5 or 6, he would have to work for 1 or 2 hours at home. Okay, so that's pretty long. Okay. So this is the teacher's room, workroom. So in Japan, typically all of the teachers would work, when they're not teaching, they would work in the teacher's room. There would be a big teacher's room. Sometimes they would have their own labs. For example, a science teacher would have some space next to the laboratory where they could prepare for classes. But typically, you see a big room, all of the teachers are working side by side. It's very crowded, not very much privacy, okay? And the vice principal, I think, would usually be there too. So it's kind of nice because you can always talk to the other teachers and the vice principal if you have any problems. Okay. So advantages and disadvantages: easy to know people, access to this is the vice principal, but no privacy. It's crowded, okay? Okay, so another thing I'd like to mention is club activities. So I mentioned that most teachers, I think all teachers would supervise some kind of a club activity. And there's a concept in Japan, it's called bunburyodo. I've also written the Chinese characters, bunburyodo. It means to devote oneself to and excel in both academics and in athletics. Okay, so in particular, many high schools set balancing academics and athletics or club activities as the goal for their students. And so most students would belong to one or more club activity. So typically, I think 80% or more. Okay, so next. This is another teacher. So he's also a graduate of our university. He's also a biology teacher in Saitama Prefecture, which is close by. He also obtained a master's degree at our university. It's very similar. He arrives at 7:40. So this is 1 hour before school starts. He teaches 3 to 4 classes a day, and he spends about 2 hours per day in preparation. He spends about 4 hours in the teacher's room and about 1 hour in the science lab preparing for experiments, I think. His duty is also educational affairs, so he manages the timetable of all of the teachers. School ends at 3 o'clock. He supervises the biology club and the badminton club. He was a badminton athlete when he was in high school. So he spends about an hour a day supervising and 4 hours on the weekends. That's quite long. So he has to go to school on the weekends. He leaves at about 7:30 p.m. So he spends about 12 hours at work. So that's similar to Satoshi. Okay. Another characteristic of Japanese schools is that there are a lot of school events, whole school events. So this is from one of our attached affiliated high schools. We have several attached schools, elementary, junior high, and high schools, where our students would practice teaching. And so there would be geography field work. There's a sports day where everybody competes. There's a mountaineering camp, a 5-day mountaineering camp for the 10th graders, a cultural festival, a 3-day cultural festival, geology field work, a school trip. So the 11th graders would have a 5-day school trip. They would go to either Hiroshima, Nagasaki, or Busan, which is in Korea. A song festival, karuta competition. This is a card game, a traditional card game, and a long distance run. So everybody would have to run, all of the boys would have to run 10 kilometers, and the women 6 kilometers, I think. Okay, so there are many school events like this. And the teachers would work with the students to organize all of these events. So, okay, so what is the teaching schedule for American teachers? Okay, so we have some American teachers in the US that were working with us in the Global Education Research Group, okay, and they shared with us what their working hours were. So this is Ms. Lauren Gassman. She's a Japanese language teacher in Detroit, Michigan. She's been teaching for 5 years. She was actually an English language teacher in Japan. So she spent 1 year in Japan teaching English in Toyama Prefecture. Okay. So they have this program. I think it's called the JET program. So you have young people from the United States come to Japan to teach English. Okay, so her schedule at work is she arrives at 7:30. School starts at 8. She teaches one class. Then she has preparation, calling parents, lunch, and then she teaches another 2 classes. Collaboration, I forgot what that meant, and preparation. Teaches another 2 classes, and then school ends. Okay. And she leaves at 4:30. And she said that most teachers follow a similar schedule, but she still has to prepare. She has to do some work at home, maybe about 2 hours. Okay. One more teacher. This is Tiara. She's also a Japanese language teacher in Dallas, Texas. She's been teaching for 2 years. She was also an English language teacher for 2 years in Japan, okay, in Niigata Prefecture. Okay, Miss Tiara's schedule is like this. She arrives at 7:15 in the morning. School begins at 7:30. That's quite early. She teaches 4 classes. She has lunch. Then she teaches 1 more class. School ends at 3, and she leaves at 3:15, which is nice. Okay, but she still works about 1 hour per day outside of school. Okay, so she said that most teachers in her school come to work at about 11 and would leave at about 4:30. Okay, so this is just a comparison of how Japanese and American teachers spend time at work. So the number of classes, so they more or less correlate with the TALIS surveys that I showed you. So Japanese teachers have fewer hours actually teaching. The hours spent grading and preparing are about the same. What's different is the hours that they spend in the teacher's room. So this is about 7.3 hours. Okay. In the US, I think usually there's no big teacher's room. So most teachers would have their own classroom where they would work. So this is almost zero. And the time they leave school is as shown here. So this correlates with the survey that I showed you. Okay. So do Japanese teachers wish they could leave earlier? So these are some results from our survey that we performed last year. Okay, so we asked young Japanese teachers, elementary, junior high, and high school teachers, how many classes so the real and ideal is, so ideal is how many classes they would like to teach, and the real is the number of classes that they actually have to teach. Okay, so this is reality, and this is ideal, their ideal number or hours. Okay, so number of classes, hours grading and preparing, hours in the teacher's room, and time to leave school. Okay, so they wish they would have slightly fewer classes, a little bit more time teaching, preparing for classes in the case of elementary school. I can't see the hours in the teacher's room. They wish that it was a little bit shorter. And the time to leave school, okay, so this is, so they actually leave school, all of them leave school at about 7:30 in the evening, but they wish they could leave school about 2 hours earlier. Okay, so that's pretty clear. Okay, so there's some data from the TALIS survey about satisfaction with their work. So in this survey, junior high school teachers were asked, if you could decide again, would you still choose to be a teacher? Okay. And in Malaysia, 93% said yes. In Finland, 85% said yes. US, 84% said yes. Okay, Singapore, Korea, and Japan is quite low. Okay, so it seems like their satisfaction with their work is somewhat low. Okay, so what is Japan doing to improve working conditions? Are they doing anything to improve or shorten their working hours? Okay, so this is a survey that was conducted by the Japanese government. This is from a survey of teachers' working conditions, which was commissioned by MEXT. MEXT is the Ministry of Education and Technology. Okay, and this survey was conducted in 2016, and it shows how teachers' working hours have actually increased in 10 years. So it shows how many hours principals, vice principals, teachers, lecturers, and nursing teachers spent at work in 2016 compared to 2006. So in these 10 years, for teachers, the number of hours spent at work is increased by 4 hours for elementary school, and is it 5 hours? Yes, 5 hours for junior high and high school teachers. Okay, so what has the government been doing? Okay, so in 2017, the Ministry of Education consulted what's called the Central Council for Education. This is a consulting agency on the work environment of teachers and work style reform of schools. And after about a year and a half of meetings, the Central Council of Education released a comprehensive policy regarding work style reform in schools for establishing sustainable education and school, I think I'm missing something, school management maybe.
Yeah.
I also have this in Japanese, so because I think I have some Japanese students here too. Okay. So the specific agenda that the government is starting to address is to define that the Central Council has the specific agenda that this Central Council has worked on was to define work that the schools should handle or work that the teachers should be responsible for, and work that schools should handle, and secondly, define work that teachers, specialists, and other personnel should handle. So they're thinking about some kind of role sharing, and define the management system and working style of schools where teachers can concentrate more on teaching children with a sense of mission. Okay, so that was their agenda. And so they proposed a division of labor in Japanese schools. So they classified, they defined what the roles of teachers are, what the roles of schools are, and then they classified this into three groups. So the first group is work for organizations outside schools, so work that the schools should outsource to outside organizations. So this is looking after students going to and from school, patrolling after school. So many times teachers would patrol the streets to see if the students are not doing something, not good. Managing money, working with community volunteers. So these are tasks that they're proposing that should be outsourced. So the teachers or schools should not be responsible for. Okay, next is work for teachers, but can be reduced. Okay, so school lunch. I'll talk about that later. So supervising school lunches in elementary and junior high schools, lesson preparation, learning assessment, school events, career guidance. These are all working with parents. So these are basically work that teachers should be responsible for, but there might be ways that it can be reduced. Okay. And finally, the third category is work for schools, but not necessarily for teachers. Okay. So this is surveys and statistics. The local governments and the Ministry of Education is always conducting different surveys that the teachers would have to answer. School breaks, so looking after children during the school breaks, school cleaning. In Japan, typically the students, the children would take turns cleaning the classroom after classes end, and the teachers would supervise this. Club activities, I talked about that. Okay, oops. Okay, so school lunches, that's not very common, I think, in the United States. So I'll talk about that. In Japanese elementary schools and junior high schools, the school, the children would take turns serving the other students, and they would eat in the classroom. So so on the bottom left, it shows children, they're carrying the food from the school kitchen. There's a kitchen in the elementary school, so they would carry the food from the kitchen to the classroom. In the classroom, on the bottom right, they would serve the other children, and then they would eat. I think the teacher is in the very back, so they would all eat together in the classroom. Okay, so this is very typical in Japanese elementary and junior high schools. Okay. So based on this report by the Central Council of Education, the Japanese Ministry of Education asked local governments and school boards to develop laws for proper management of work hours. The ministry asked school boards to redefine teachers' duties and school management. So based on this, the local governments have been implementing some practices, and I'll show you some examples of what is being done in Tokyo Prefecture. Okay, so they are enforcing regulations limiting the amount of overtime, limiting overtime work to 45 hours per month or 360 hours annually. That still seems long, but there were no laws that regulated the number of hours teachers would spend time at work. So they're implementing these kind of laws, establishing closed school days. Okay, so in Japan, even during the school breaks, the summer vacations, the schools usually would be open and they would have club activities. But in Tokyo Prefecture, they established closed school days, so 5 or more days during the long holiday periods. Okay. Placement of club activity supervisors, so in junior high schools and prefectural schools. And so these are some of the results. So in 2019, in Tokyo Prefecture, they placed 386 club activity supervisors, which resulted in a reduction of in-school time of teachers by about 1 hour and 33 minutes per week for junior high schools, and about the same time for prefectural schools. Okay. They've also, in Tokyo Prefecture, they've also started to place school support staff. So these are people who will assist in preparation of classes. So like making photocopies of handouts and things like this. So they placed 986 people in 45 districts. So this resulted in an in-school time of teachers by about 4 hours and 30 minutes per week. So these are some the results by the local school board. Okay. They also placed part-time workers to assist in vice principal's duties, which so this is 476 elementary and junior high schools and 40 prefectural schools. Okay, So next, the next section, I'll describe some results from our survey that relate to which duties Japanese teachers feel professional and personal satisfaction. So this is from our survey from last year. So I'll just show some results that I think are relevant to what I talked about today. Okay, so this is we asked new teachers about professional satisfaction. So this is the quality of teaching, how important they think that quality of teaching is, being a role model is, being popular with students is, and how important spending time with other teachers is. Okay, so this is on a scale of 1 to 6. 1 is not very important, 6 is very important. The blue bars are elementary school and the red bars are middle and high school, junior high and high school. So you can see that Japanese teachers think that the quality of teaching and being a role model are both very important. Being popular with students and spending time with other teachers, maybe not so much. Okay. Next, this is Japanese teachers' perception of club activities. Okay. And so this is on a scale of 1 to 10. Okay, so for elementary schools usually don't have very many club activities, so there's no data here. But for junior high and high school, how much professional satisfaction they feel supervising club activities and how much personal enjoyment they feel supervising club activities. And this is on a scale of 1 to 10. And for junior high school, it's about 4.3, high school 5.1, and 6.3. So you can see that it's not very high. But what's interesting, if you look at what the individual numbers are for professional satisfaction in junior high and high school, this is what it looks like. So this is the same question. So how important is supervising club activities for your personal satisfaction? The scale is from 1 to 10. And you can see that there are many teachers that think that club activities is not very important, whereas there are, if you go to the right, there are still a lot of teachers that think that supervising club activities is quite important, very important. Okay, so the perception of how important they think club activities is varies quite a bit. Okay. So this is from our survey too. So Japanese teachers' working hours and general satisfaction and enjoyment. Okay. So we asked them how important it is to be efficient, finishing tasks as quickly as possible so that they can spend time for themselves. Okay, so this is on a scale of 1 to 6, and it's about five. So it's very important to be efficient and finishing tasks quickly. And how about not staying at school too long? How important is that? And on a scale of 1 to 6, it's about between 5 and 6, a little bit lower for high school. As I mentioned on the bottom, high school teachers showed a weaker correlation between working hours and professional satisfaction in this survey and also in the TALIS survey. So a lot of teachers, high school teachers, seem to enjoy, they don't mind spending long hours at school. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. Okay, so what do these results tell us? So I think two things are quite important when we think about Japanese teachers' long working hours and how we might be able to make them shorter. So as I showed you, various aspects of teaching are important for Japanese teachers' professional satisfaction and enjoyment. What I'm trying to say is that different teachers value different tasks. So as I showed you for supervising club activities, some teachers don't think it's very important, while other teachers, for other teachers, sometimes it's the most important thing for them. For example, there's a member of our global research group that thought that looking after children coming to and leaving school is something that she was looking forward to the most, okay, which is, I think, kind of interesting too. So what kind of tasks teachers value can vary quite a bit, and this is, I think, a problem, because in Japan there's the notion that all of the teachers should share duties equally. So everybody should supervise club activities and share a lot of the school duties. Okay. Second thing that our results show is that being efficient and not staying at school too long are important for Japanese teachers. So the long Japanese work hours are not because Japanese teachers want to stay for long hours, but they would like to leave early. Okay, so I think that those are two important conclusions that our results tell us. Okay, so finally, I have some questions that I'd like you to think about. So the first one is, if you could, based on what I talked to you about today, would you like to teach in a Japanese school? Okay. I think it's important that you be honest. Okay, so I think many of you would not agree to working such long hours in Japanese schools, but I'd like you, to be honest. If you don't think so, be honest, and it would be very nice if you could tell us, why you think so. And the second question is, are there any aspects of Japanese schools that interested you? Some of the aspects of Japanese schools that I talked to you about. Maybe there are some aspects of what is done in Japanese schools that might be adaptable to schools in the US. So I'd be very interested to hear about what you think about that. Okay, so I think I'd like to end here.
Thank you, Dr. Harada and Professor Harada. We are already assigned the rooms for all of you. So I'm dividing the group into the class into 6 groups. So there will be 6 groups for discussions. So you focus on these 2 questions. Each of the groups, you would have at least 1 Japanese or 1 American faculty member who will be leading the discussion or just facilitating the discussion. So we'll come back in about 25 minutes at 7:15. So we'll spend about 25 minutes to talk about them in detail. So everyone should have a chance to talk about your opinions about the similarities and differences between American schools and Japanese schools, in terms of how you spend the time and whether you like to teach in that school, and any areas that you like to learn more about Japanese school system. So I'm going to send you to the room.
Thank you, Nkai.
Sure.